Hello and welcome to Employers Council. My name is James McDonough. In my role here at Employers Council, I teach the class Record Keeping for Human Resources, as well as manage and edit the Federal Record Retention Guide. In my role as HR Research Consultant, I'm constantly looking for new information for both the class and for that resource that our members can use when it comes to federal records and retention requirements. So one of the major concepts that we talk about in our class and with our members when it comes to record keeping is the concept of security and what an employer's responsibility is when it comes to safeguarding the records of their employees. So in essence, when an employer receives information from their employees, whether it's in a hard copy on paper or if it's electronic in an email or in some sort of database, it is the responsibility of the employer to safeguard that information and to take reasonable steps to do so. So for instance, with paper copies, the employer really should have that document in a locked file cabinet in a locked room. Now when it comes to cyber records, electronic records, again, the employer needs to take steps to safeguard that, use firewalls, use malware protection and other resources to safeguard electronic records. So recently, an article came to my attention on this topic of cybersecurity and what the role and responsibility is for employers. Much to my surprise, it turns out that there is quite a bit of disagreement across the country on this issue, and that it's in essence being worked out in the courts, and that court rulings vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And in some cases, the courts rule that the employer was negligent, whereas in a very similar case in another jurisdiction, the court rules that it was not the employer's responsibility, and that therefore they cannot be held responsible for the hacking of their records and the subsequent damage to their employees. So this is really surprising to me. It turns out that there are two states, California and Massachusetts, that have passed specific legislation and requirements to impose on employers this responsibility to safeguard records and possibly for notification purposes of any sort of data breach. And outside of the United States, there's activity. The European Union, come May of this year, is imposing the GDPR, which basically requires that all employers and organizations doing business in the European Union, that they protect personal information for their employees as well as their customers, and that if there is a breach, that they notify them within a very defined time period. So do keep that in mind in case you have employees in Europe. But back to the United States. So here in the US, it turns out cybersecurity is obviously an issue. We hear about it all the time in the news with hacks of employee records, and it causes a lot of damage and heartache for a lot of people. But what is the responsibility of the employer? So our advice to you employers is to certainly take reasonable measures to safeguard your employees' data in your electronic format. Now, this article that I reviewed indicates that 90% of breaches are caused by what's called phishing. And this can be as very simple as an email being sent to an employer and an unsuspecting employee on the other end takes action on that email. Sometimes the email will say, "We're with such and such agency and you must provide us your employee records, including social security numbers, dates of birth, full names, addresses, etc." And again, that unsuspecting employee releases that information to this phishing scam. The other major way, or one of the other major ways that employee data breaches occur is through employee theft. So it turns out that there's a fair number of employees out there, maybe they're disgruntled or maybe they just are up to no good. They steal laptops from their employer that contain sensitive information, private information of fellow employees, and then use it for various purposes. So when you think about those two ways that your records could be breached, I would suggest, for instance, having policies in place around the safeguarding and the access of such information, and as well training all of your staff who has access to this information to safeguard it and to not take action on random requests for information. And really, overall, a best practice is to provide cybersecurity training for all your employees throughout the organization so that you don't let those phishing scams in to your organization. So those are two major ways, policies and training, to safeguard your employees' information. Because even if the courts aren't settled, you have better things to do than to get hauled into court and have it figured out that way. And as well, your employees will certainly appreciate you protecting their information. A resource I'd like to share with you that came up in this article is it's called the 20 Critical Security Controls, and is published by the Center for Internet Security, a nonprofit organization. And I pulled it up and printed it off, and I found it to be, there's a combination of things in here that certainly your HR folks should work with your IT office and experts on to go over and see how you're protecting your information. But there's also roles for HR to take in here on this list. So HR, the bottom line is collaborate with your IT department and your security professionals to help safeguard your information. And if you have any questions on this, Employers Council is here to help. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you like, if you're a member and you'd like more information, if you'd like this URL for this link to identify those 20 steps. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great day.